An elderly woman opened her cabin and found a former Navy SEAL collapsed beside his German Shepherd. The exhausted dog guarded him until she earned enough trust to bring them both inside. When he woke, 4 hours were missing, and the map case strapped to him was gone. His tracks climbed the wrong trail, while his own dog had refused to follow him. Then the shepherd watched a forbidden creek as hidden water began undermining the ridge road. Why had the widow torn the final page about what her late husband never finished? Stay with this story to the end. Please like and subscribe for more journeys of loyalty and healing. The scratching came before daylight. Lillian Ward heard it through the cabin door while she was standing at the stove in wool socks, waiting for the coffee to finish. It was not the knock of a branch or the scrape of ice sliding from the porch roof. It came again. 3 weak strokes against the lower panel, then silence. At 80, Lillian had learned not to rush towards strange sounds in the mountains. She set the coffee aside, pulled on her brown barn coat, slipped her feet into boots, and took the flashlight from the hook beside the door. Outside, Red Willow Ridge was gray with the first light of morning. Wet snow covered the yard in a thin, uneven layer. The storm had passed sometime before dawn, leaving the pines heavy and the road invisible beneath slush and broken branches. A German Shepherd stood on the porch. The dog was large, black and tan, with a broad dark saddle and gray beginning to show around the muzzle. One ear stood perfectly straight. The tip of the other bent slightly forward. His coat was wet, his sides moving hard with fatigue, and almost all the weight of a man rested against him. The stranger sat half-collapsed beside the porch rail, one shoulder against the dog, head hanging forward. He wore woodland camouflage, brown combat boots, and a dark olive field jacket soaked along the hem. A black tactical watch sat on his left wrist. Lillian opened the door another few inches. The dog stepped between them. He did not bark. That concerned her more than barking would have. His head stayed low. His amber eyes never left her hands. "All right," Lillian said quietly. "You have made your position clear." The shepherd held still. Lillian did not reach for the man. She went back inside, filled a metal bowl with water, grabbed an old wool blanket and returned. She placed both on the porch several feet away, then lowered herself onto the top step with more care than she would have needed 10 years earlier. The dog looked at the water, then at her. "You do not have to like me," she said, "but he needs to come inside." The stranger moved slightly. The dog turned at once and touched his nose to the man's hand. That small movement told Lillian enough. The shepherd was not guarding a body. He was waiting for his person to answer. Lillian remained where she was. After a long minute, the dog drank twice from the bowl. Then he backed one step away from the man. Permission, or close enough to it. Lillian stood. "Thank you." The dog watched her kneel beside the stranger. His skin was cold, but not frighteningly so. His breathing was shallow and steady. When she touched his shoulder, his face tightened, but he did not wake. She was not going to lift him. At 80, pride was expensive, and backs did not forgive stupid decisions. Lillian crossed the yard to the woodshed and returned with the low sled she used for hauling split cedar. She spread the blanket over it, then worked slowly, shifting the stranger a little at a time. The dog stayed close enough that his shoulder brushed the man's arm. "Your help is mostly emotional at this point," Lillian told him. The shepherd ignored her. They got the man inside. Lillian settled him on the rug near the stove, removed his wet outer coat, and covered him with dry blankets. Beneath the jacket he wore a long-sleeved camouflage tactical shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, matching cargo pants and a web belt. His clothes and build told one story: The way his boots had been maintained told another. Military, she thought. Former, probably. The dog entered only after the man was inside. He inspected the room once, then lay beside him with his chest toward the door. Lillian found identification in an inside pocket. Evan Rourke, 45. A second card identified him as former military. She did not need the printed words to guess the rest. His posture, even unconscious, had the strange economy of someone who had spent years learning not to waste motion. She took the radio from the shelf and tried the lower ridge frequency. Red Willow base. This is Ward cabin. Static. She tried again. Ward cabin calling Red Willow base. I have an adult male here. Conscious status intermittent. Cold exposure. No visible serious injury. A voice broke through for half a second. Then nothing. Lillian stared at the radio. Excellent service as always. The shepherd lifted one ear. I was talking about the radio. The dog put his head down again. By mid-morning, Evan woke. His eyes opened without confusion at first. Gray-blue, sharp, immediately searching. Window, stove, door, Lillian, dog. Then his expression changed. Boone. The shepherd stood and went to him. Evan put one hand against Boone's neck and closed his eyes for 1 second. Not relief, exactly. Recognition. Lillian handed him a cup. Water. Evan tried to sit. Slowly. I need to get back to my truck. No. His eyes moved to her. Lillian did not soften the word. You were cold enough to make poor decisions before I met you. I do not plan to help you make another. My pack is in the truck. It will still be in the truck after you drink. Evan drank, but only because his body apparently agreed with Lillian. An hour later, he tried to stand. He got upright, for perhaps 3 seconds. Then the room shifted under him. Lillian saw it happen before he admitted it. Sit. I'm fine. You are leaning on my table. That table is sturdy. It is 80 years younger than I am and still knows when to stay put. A faint change touched his mouth, almost a smile. Then Evan turned toward the door. Boone moved first. The German shepherd crossed the room and lay directly in front of it. Evan stopped. Boone. Move. The dog looked up. Did not move. Evan's jaw tightened. Boone. Nothing. Lillian folded her arms. I like him. Evan gave her a look. He usually follows commands. Maybe he has standards. For the first time, genuine irritation broke through Evan's control. Not anger at the dog. Something closer to embarrassment. He sat back down. That afternoon, pieces of the previous night returned. His pickup had lost traction on the upper road. The right tire slid into soft ground. The truck stopped at an angle below the shoulder, intact but stuck. He had gotten out with Boone. He remembered checking the road. Remembered darkness arriving faster than expected. Remembered opening a map. Then almost nothing. How long? Lillian asked. Evan looked at the watch on his left wrist. Maybe 4 hours. You were walking? I must have been. With the dog? Yes. You remember reaching the cabin? No. That answer bothered him. Lillian could see it in the way his thumb pressed against the edge of his watch. Evan checked his belt, then his coat. Once. Twice. What? My map case. Lillian looked toward the hooks where she had hung his things. There was no case. He searched the coat himself. The black survival pack was still in the truck, he said. His phone too, most likely. But the map case should have been attached to him. Always. A short piece of charcoal gray paracord remained looped through one belt point where the case normally sat. The other end was frayed. Evan stared at it. What was in it? Lillian asked. Topographic maps. Notes. Compass. Anything valuable. Yes? Money? No. That told her what kind of man he was. Evan sat very still. A man who had spent much of his adult life knowing exactly where he was now, had 4 missing hours and a piece of equipment he could not account for. Lillian stopped asking questions. Near evening, she carried another armload of wood inside. One split log slipped against the stoveplate. Metal struck metal with a hard, sudden crack. Evan froze. It lasted only a second, maybe 2. His shoulders locked. His gaze went somewhere past the cabin wall. Boone was asleep near the table. He came upright instantly. The dog crossed to Evan and pressed his shoulder firmly against Evan's left leg. No barking, no pawing. He simply stood there. Evan looked down. His hand settled on Boone's back. One breath, then another. The tension eased. Lillian put the log into the stove. She did not ask what had happened. Evan did not offer an explanation. That night, Boone slept between his chair and the door. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Lillian stepped outside carrying a bucket of kindling and found Boone already in the yard. He was not at the gate. He was behind the cabin. The shepherd stood at the edge of an old path running down toward the creek, nose lifted, body still. Lillian stopped. The bucket touched the ground harder than she intended. Evan came out behind her, moving carefully but steadily. Boone. The dog glanced back, then looked down the path again. Lillian's voice changed. Evan, call him back. Evan looked at her. What's down there? Lillian kept her eyes on Boone. Call him. Why? She finally faced him. For the first time since opening her door to a half-frozen stranger, Lillian looked unsettled. No one has used that path in 12 years. Boone came back from the old path only after Evan called a 3rd time. He did not hurry. The German shepherd turned away from the wet leaves, crossed the yard at an easy walk, and stopped beside Evan, as if nothing unusual had happened. Lillian picked up the kindling bucket she had dropped and carried it toward the cabin, without explaining why a 12-year-old path had changed her voice. Evan followed slowly. His legs felt steadier than the day before, but not steady enough to argue with the truth. By the time he reached the porch, his breathing had gone shallow from an effort that should have been ordinary. Lillian noticed. She said nothing until he reached for the wood box beside the stove. No. Evan looked at her. You have enough strength to carry yourself today. Do not get ambitious. I can carry firewood. You can also fall on my floor and make me regret opening the door. Boone lay down near the stove. Evan looked at the dog. You're no help? Boone closed his eyes. That became the pattern of the next 2 days. Evan tried to increase his usefulness. Lillian reduced his ambitions to whatever she considered sensible. He repaired the loose latch on a kitchen cupboard. He replaced a frayed pull cord on the bedroom curtain. He tightened 2 screws on the shed hinge and cleaned the soot from the small inspection plate on the wood stove. When he asked for an axe, Lillian handed him one and pointed to 6 short cedar rounds beside the porch. Those. There are 40 more behind the shed. Those are tomorrow's argument. Evan split the 6. He hated how much satisfaction the work gave him. Lillian noticed that too. The cabin had not been neglected. That was important. The wood was stacked by size. Food was labeled. Tools were kept in places that made sense once a person understood Lillian's logic. A notebook beside the radio listed fuel, weather, medicine, and maintenance dates in tight handwriting. Nothing about the place suggested helplessness. What Evan saw instead was a house operating with almost no margin. The stove door needed pressure on the left side before the latch caught. One porch step had been reinforced twice. The shed roof drained toward a corner where the ground had begun to sink. The radio battery held a charge, but not for long. Lillian kept a second kettle warm because the kitchen tap sometimes lost pressure without warning. Most of those things were small. Small things were what failed first. On the second afternoon, Evan turned the tap to wash sawdust from his hands. Water came out hard for 3 seconds, weakened to a thin stream, then recovered. He watched it. Lillian was sorting potatoes at the table. It does that often? Enough to annoy me. How long? A few weeks. And you haven't checked it? I have checked what I can reach without crawling under frozen ground. He dried his hands. Where does the water come from? That question got more of her attention than the tap had. Lillian set one potato aside. Spring above the cabin. Warren built a cistern into the slope years ago. Gravity feeds the house. County water doesn't reach here? It reaches the lower ridge. Not this far. Warren kept our spring branch when the other old lines were retired. Evan glanced toward the back window. The other lines. Lillian knew what he meant. She sighed. You are going to make that path your business, aren't you? I'm trying to understand the property. That is how people describe being nosy when they own good boots. Evan almost smiled. Lillian stood and took a flashlight from the pantry. Instead of heading outside, she opened a narrow utility cupboard near the back door. Inside sat a simple pressure gauge and a hand-drawn mark beside it in faded pencil. Warren set that mark, she said. Normal pressure. The needle rested below it. How low does it go at night? Lower. And the cistern drops after dark, comes back by morning. Evan frowned. A gravity-fed spring system could change with demand, temperature, trapped air, sediment, or a leaking branch. But a tank that lost water at night and recovered without anyone using more made him think of movement somewhere else. You think the line is clogged? I think I am 80 years old and would enjoy having one problem that is boring. He looked at the gauge again. Boone had risen from the stove. The dog walked to the back door and stood there. Lillian saw him. So much for boring. She did not open the door. Not that day. Instead, she gave Evan a box of old pipe fittings to sort and told him which ones Warren had refused to throw away. Evan did not press her about the path. He had learned enough in 48 hours to understand that Lillian resisted hardest when pushed before she had decided for herself. That evening, Boone chose the rug beside her chair instead of the place near Evan. Lillian rubbed one finger along the bent tip of his right ear. You have poor professional boundaries. Boone leaned his shoulder against her boot. Evan watched from the table while repairing the loose strap on his watch. He usually sleeps where he can see me. Maybe he can see you from there. He's facing the stove. Then perhaps he has finally developed priorities. The joke was light, but something in Evan's face changed. Lillian caught it. You mind? No. That answer came too quickly. Boone had spent years working beside Evan. Commands, routines, movement, rest. Some part of Evan still understood loyalty as position. The dog near his leg, the team where he could see it, responsibility kept inside reach. Lillian did not know the history behind that. She only recognized the habit. People had habits too. Some called them discipline. Some called them independence. Sometimes they were only fear that had learned respectable clothing. The next morning, the kitchen tap coughed air, then stopped. Lillian turned it off and stood still. Evan looked over from the table. How long until the cistern refills? It should not be empty. That ended the argument. They waited until the sun had warmed the crust on the snow. Evan carried a small wrench, flashlight, and coil of cord. Lillian carried the valve and a walking stick she insisted was for testing mud rather than balance. Boone went ahead. The old path descended behind the cabin through fir and willow. Wet leaves lay beneath a thin skin of ice. Evan moved carefully, not because Lillian asked, but because his body still punished him when he forgot the last 3 days. Boone stopped at a narrow plank bridge over the creek. The bridge was only 6 feet long. Evan put one boot toward it. Boone stayed where he was. The dog lowered his nose near the first plank, then stepped off the trail and moved along the bank instead. Evan paused. What? Boone looked back once. Evan crouched and pressed the end of his wrench against the soil beside the bridge support. The ground gave too easily. He brushed away wet leaves. Water had cut a hollow beneath the bank. The support's sitting over air, he said. Lillian came closer, but stayed on firm ground. That wasn't like that last spring. Evan studied the creek. Water's been moving under it. They followed Boone's route around the bridge. Farther down, a section of dark iron showed beneath exposed roots. Lillian wiped mud away with her glove. 2 raised letters appeared. W. Evan looked at her. Warren Ward? My husband had a habit of labeling anything he thought people might blame him for later. She kept her hand on the pipe. For the first time, her dry humor did not hide much. Warren Ward, she explained, had spent most of his working life repairing county roads, culverts, pumps, and rural water systems. Decades earlier, before the lower ridge received modern service, Warren and several neighbors had built a gravity network from springs above the valley. Then came the wildfire 12 years ago. The fire had stripped vegetation from the upper slope. Heavy rain followed. Mud moved. One section of the old system failed, and most of the network was abandoned afterward. Our branch was separated, Lillian said. The cabin still uses the spring. The rest was supposed to be dead. Evan placed his palm against the exposed iron. He held it there. A faint vibration passed through the pipe. Not machinery. Flow. Lillian, she looked at his hand. There's water in this. That line was closed. Maybe. Her eyes sharpened. You sound very pleased with that word. I'm not. They continued to a low wooden shed, partly hidden by brush. Lillian unlocked it with a key from the old ring at her belt. Inside, dust covered 2 valves and a pressure gauge. Evan wiped the glass. The needle trembled above 0. Lillian stared at it. Nothing else in the shed moved. Nothing needed to. A line that should have been dry was carrying pressure. Evan straightened carefully. Did Warren close the overflow himself? Lillian's fingers tightened around the valve key. I think so. Evan waited. She looked at the gauge again. You think? Lillian did not answer. By late afternoon, they were back at the cabin. Evan rested without being told, which Lillian noticed, but did not reward with comment. Boone drank, circled twice near the stove, then walked past Evan and settled beside Lillian's chair. Evan looked down at him. Looks like I'm losing personnel. Lillian rested one hand on Boone's neck. Maybe he doesn't think loyalty means standing beside one person for the rest of his life. Evan's expression went still. Before he could answer, tires crunched outside. A dark SUV stopped beyond the porch. A broad-shouldered man with graying brown hair stepped out, shut the door hard, and started toward the cabin. He looked past Evan first, directly at Lillian. Then his attention dropped to the old pressure gauge still in her hand. The man stopped. Mom. Lillian's shoulders tightened. This was Peter Ward, 56, her son, and whatever worry had brought him up the ridge disappeared beneath something older when he saw the gauge. Did you open Dad's line again? Come inside, Peter. He did not move. You told me it was buried. Peter Ward did not come inside until Lillian stopped asking him to. He stood at the edge of the porch with snow melting along the shoulders of his tan canvas jacket, staring at the old pressure gauge in her hand. At 56, Peter had his mother's steady eyes, but none of her talent for hiding worry. Gray had begun to spread through his brown hair, and the lines beside his mouth made him look tired, even when he was not. I didn't open anything, Lillian said. Then why do you have that? Because the line has pressure. Peter looked past her toward the back of the property. That line was supposed to be dead. So, I have recently been informed. Evan stayed near the door with Boone beside him. He had known Peter for less than a minute and already understood that this argument had existed long before he arrived. Peter finally looked at Evan. His attention moved once over the camouflage shirt, the black watch, the healing stiffness in Evan's posture, then to Boone. "And you are?" "Evan Rourke. The man Mom found outside." "That would be me." Peter glanced at Lillian. "You didn't mention the dog." "The radio barely let me mention the man." That ended the introduction. Inside, Peter explained why he had driven up. He had called for 2 days and received nothing. The lower road had only reopened that morning, and he had spent most of the drive expecting to find a dead generator, a broken pipe, or his mother standing on the roof with a hammer insisting everything was fine. "I don't climb roofs anymore," Lillian said. Peter looked at her. "Not alone. That does not improve the sentence." He moved through the cabin with the familiarity of someone who had grown up there. He checked the stove latch, opened the utility cupboard, tested the kitchen tap, and looked at the notebook beside the radio. Then he saw the water pressure fall. "That's enough," he said. "Come down with me for winter." Lillian did not even turn around. "No." "Mom." "No. You've got a water problem, a bad bridge, an old stove, and a road that nearly closed after one storm. The stove is older than you and complains less." Peter ignored that. "You can stay with us until March. The cabin will still be here." Evan should have kept quiet. He knew that even before he spoke. He's not completely wrong. Lillian turned. The room changed. Evan had seen people become angry in louder ways. Lillian did not need volume. "I pulled you out of the snow," she said. "I did not pull you into my life, so you could vote on where I'm allowed to live." Evan held her gaze. Peter looked almost pleased to have company on the wrong side of her temper. "That's fair," Evan said. "No, it isn't. Fair would have been minding your business." Boone looked from one person to the other, then lay down. Evan stepped back from the argument. For the rest of the morning, Lillian gave him the efficient silence normally reserved for broken appliances. Peter eventually found him outside near the shed. "You always volunteer for family disputes?" "Apparently once." "That's usually enough." Peter leaned against the porch rail. "She thinks I want the cabin." "Do you?" "No." The answer came without hesitation. "I want to stop wondering if the next phone call is somebody telling me I waited too long." Evan looked toward the kitchen window. Lillian's outline moved behind the curtain. Peter rubbed both hands over his face. "She has been alone here since Dad died. Every year she says one more winter. Every year the place asks a little more from her. And every year she makes it through. That is exactly her argument." Peter did not ask Evan to take his side again. Instead, he offered something practical. "If you're strong enough, I can take you to your truck. Lower road's passable now." Evan looked toward Boone. The shepherd was already standing. By noon, they were driving slowly down a narrow secondary road in Peter's SUV. Evan felt better than he had the day before. Not well enough to forget the stiffness through his back and legs, but well enough to walk a reasonable distance without Lillian ordering him into a chair. His pickup sat where he remembered it, nose angled down the shoulder, 2 tires buried in soft ground. The body was intact. Inside, his black survival pack lay behind the passenger seat. His phone was under the center console. Nothing had been taken. Evan stood beside the driver's door and tried to build the missing night from what remained. Vehicle stopped. Pack left inside. He and Boone got out. After that, blank space. Peter pointed toward the road edge. "Those yours?" Under the newer crust of snow, shallow impressions remained where older tracks had compressed the ground. Evan followed them with his eyes. They didn't lead downhill. They climbed toward an abandoned service road. Something tightened behind his ribs. I went up. Peter looked at him. You remember? No. They followed the old route on foot. Boone moved freely but stayed within sight, occasionally lowering his nose where the earlier tracks crossed exposed ground. He was not working a formal scent trail. He was simply moving through terrain he had crossed before. After almost a mile, Boone stopped beside a weathered fence. Peter saw the material first. There. A short strip of reflective nylon hung from a strand of wire. Evan took it between 2 fingers. Same fabric, same stitching. He stepped through the open section of fence and searched the low brush. The map case lay beneath a juniper branch 10 yards away. Mud along one side. Strap torn. Still closed. Evan picked it up. Peter checked the snow around them. No other tracks I can make out. There wouldn't need to be. Peter looked at him. Evan stared at the case. I brought it here. The words felt worse once spoken. A memory came back without warning. Not a full scene. A headlamp beam moving across paper. His own gloved hand holding the map. Boone standing 20 feet ahead. Evan pointing uphill. Go! Boone taking several steps. Stopping. Looking back. Another fragment. Wind through trees. Evan angry now. Not frightened. Angry. Boone. Forward. The dog refusing. Evan closed his eyes. Peter did not interrupt. More came. He had been disoriented after the truck stopped. Not helpless. Not unconscious. That was what made it difficult. He had believed he was functional. He had read the map and chosen a cut across the ridge. Boone disagreed. The shepherd had repeatedly gone downhill instead, returned, then gone downhill again, until Evan finally followed. Evan opened his eyes. Boone stood a few yards away, watching him. You did this before, Peter said quietly. It was not really a question. Evan held the broken strap in his hand. Different place. He could have stopped there. Instead, he continued. Last year's I was in. We had a withdrawal that went bad. Too much happening at once. I kept making calls after I should have handed it off. Peter stayed quiet. One of my teammates did it for me. Caleb Hart. He make it? Yes. That answer carried its own weight. He got everyone out. He also got hurt badly enough that he never went back to the job. Peter waited. Evan looked at Boone. Caleb told me later it was his decision. Said I needed to stop making his choice into my guilt. You believed him? No. The honesty surprised Evan more than Peter. For years he had built a life around one private rule. If someone else had to carry what belonged to him, he had failed. So he carried more. Decided more. Needed less. It had looked like discipline from the outside. On this mountain, it had almost become another wrong turn. Boone walked over and stood beside him. Evan rested one hand against the dog's neck. You stopped listening to me. Boone looked toward the downhill trail. Peter gave a short breath that might have been a laugh. Seems to be a theme around here. They returned to the SUV with the map case. On the drive back, Peter did not offer advice about Caleb. Evan appreciated him for that. At the cabin, Lillian saw the recovered case and then Evan's face. You found it? Yes. Someone take it? No. She waited. I did. Lillian understood enough not to ask for the rest. Peter took a folded county notice from his jacket and put it on the kitchen table. I got this yesterday. Lillian opened it. The county road department had recorded several shallow depressions along the upper section of Red Willow Road after repeated freeze-thaw cycles. Crews would continue monitoring the surface, but additional storms could force a temporary closure. Evan read it once. How many people live above the problem area? Peter looked at him. You thought Mom was the only one? I assumed. Bad habit. Lillian almost smiled. Peter pointed toward the ridge through the window. Roy Alden's up there. 74. The Harkers are both past 70. June Bell keeps 3 horses near the East Cut. There's a family running the seasonal wood shop, and the radio repeater for half this side of the valley sits above all of them. Evan looked from the notice to the pressure gauge resting near the sink. Water, moving where it should not. Ground being hollowed near the creek. A road beginning to settle farther down the same ridge. He did not say they were connected. Not yet. Lillian saw the thought anyway. This time, when Evan looked at her, he did not tell her what they should do. He asked, "Who around here knows that road better than Warren did?" Lillian folded the notice once. Not many. Then she reached for the radio. By 9 the next morning, Gail Turner had already told Evan twice not to touch anything. The first time was at the old valve shed below Lillian's cabin. The second came 20 minutes later, when he crouched beside a shallow depression near Red Willow Road and reached toward the wet gravel. "Look all you want," Gail said, "but if County finds out we started digging around their road before they get eyes on it, Raymond Pike will personally drive up here just to explain jurisdiction." Evan stood. Gail Turner was 61, broad-shouldered, gray-haired, and built like someone who had spent half her life outside in weather other people discussed from windows. She wore a charcoal work shirt under a faded brick red rescue jacket and carried a black waterproof clipboard against one hip. Peter had called her before breakfast. She had arrived 40 minutes later. Her first question had not been about Evan's military background. It had been, "Who saw the water first?" Lillian answered. Gail listened. Then she asked where Warren had placed the old lines. That was why Evan respected her before noon. Boone moved ahead of them through the trees, not searching for anything specific. He stopped where the ground softened, sniffed once, then continued. Lillian followed more slowly with her walking stick. Whenever the slope steepened, Boone shortened his pace without being called. Evan noticed. He did not comment. Peter did. He does that for Mom now. He does what he wants lately. Lillian heard them. A sign of maturity. They reached the lower valve and found the pressure gauge still trembling. Gail studied it without touching the valves. "You said this overflow was abandoned?" "Supposed to be," Lillian said. "Supposed to be is a dangerous phrase around old infrastructure." Evan almost smiled. Gail radioed Raymond Pike, the county road foreman responsible for Red Willow Road. His voice came through rough with static. Raymond was 58 and had spent more than 30 years dealing with culverts, washouts, frozen shoulders, and residents who believed county property ended wherever their patients did. He confirmed the depressions had been logged. "Do not cut into the road," he said. "Do not open anything that could increase flow. Mark what you see. Photograph it. Give me coordinates." "What about the private branch above Ward property?" Gail asked. "If you can safely reduce water before it reaches county drainage without sending it somewhere worse, document it first and call me." "That sounds almost like permission." "It sounds exactly like me not wanting to explain this twice." The radio clicked off. Lillian looked at Gail. "I like him. You say that because he sounds rude. I respect efficiency." They spent the next 2 hours following Warren's old markers through the trees. Some were iron stakes barely visible under moss. Others were small cuts in cedar posts, each mark meaningless, until Lillian explained what Warren had used them for. Peter remembered one bypass installed after the wildfire. Evan noticed that 2 points on Warren's route lined up with the soft ground they had already seen. Gail compared elevations and took notes. No one person had enough information. That seemed to bother Evan more than it bothered anyone else. At the bottom of a narrow draw, Lillian stopped. "There used to be another shed here." Peter looked around. "I thought Dad tore it down." "No." He moved the door. That sentence makes no sense. It did to your father. Behind a wall of willow, they found a low structure with one side nearly swallowed by brush. The latch had rusted, but held. Lillian stared at it. I haven't opened this in years. She tried one key, then another. The third turned. Inside were old valve tools, a cracked lantern, 3 coils of wire, and a shelf high enough to stay dry above seasonal runoff. Lillian reached behind the lantern. Her fingers touched metal. She pulled out a rectangular green box with rubber seals along the lid. Peter looked at her. You remembered that? No. Lillian wiped dirt from the top. I remembered your father never trusted paper near water. The box contained maps rolled around cardboard tubes, maintenance notes, flood level measurements, and old photographs of Red Willow Ridge before the road had been widened. Gale spread the papers across the cleanest section of the workbench. One map showed the spring branch feeding Lillian's cistern. Another showed the abandoned community network. A third showed an overflow line Warren had installed after the wildfire. Peter traced it with one finger. This wasn't here before the burn. No, Lillian said. The slope was shedding mud every hard rain. Warren redirected the excess until County finished the new drainage. Gale looked at her. Then he closed it? Lillian did not answer. Evan saw the answer before she gave one. I thought he did. The notebook told a more complicated story. Warren had marked every valve by date. Most had a final notation beside them. Closed, removed, bypassed. The overflow line did not. Its final entry simply read, temporary, review after county culvert. Nothing followed. Peter looked up. So nobody ever closed it. Maybe they forgot to write it down, Lillian said. Gale shook her head. Your father documented hinge grease. Lillian gave her a look. Gale tapped another sheet. A culvert diagram beneath Red Willow Road showed where the overflow crossed near the lower cut. Beside it, Warren had drawn a small square labeled Road Shed. Evan studied the contour lines. Water leaves the spring branch here. Gale nodded. Then if this culvert lost capacity, it would find another path, Peter said. Water always does, Lillian answered. That was the first moment the separate problems stopped looking separate. The weak pressure at the cabin, the hollow ground beneath the old bridge, the settling road. Gale took photographs and sent them to Raymond. 10 minutes later, his voice came through the radio. If that map is accurate, we may have water tracking along the culvert bedding. That can carry fines out under the road. Evan looked toward the ridge. So the surface stays intact, while the material underneath leaves. For a while, Raymond said. That does not mean the road is failing today. It means I want nobody guessing with a shovel. What can we do? Mark soft ground. Keep vehicles off anything questionable. If there's a safe point on private land where you can reduce flow into the old overflow, send me pictures first. I'll get a crew up when I can. Gale closed the radio. We have an answer. Peter looked at the maps. We have a worse question. Whether the overflow was enough to turn a settling road into a closed one when the next warm rain arrived. Lillian picked up Warren's notebook. A page near the back had been torn out cleanly. Her thumb stopped on the missing edge. Evan noticed. So something's missing. Paper, she said. What was on it? I don't remember. Peter looked at his mother. He said nothing. That silence told Evan more than an argument would have. By late afternoon, Gale had called a meeting at Red Willow Volunteer Hall. The building smelled of old coffee, damp coats, and propane heat. 11 people came. Roy Alden, 74, arrived in a Sherpa vest and complained that nobody had ever closed a mountain because water was thinking about moving. June Bell wanted to know what would happen to her 3 horses if the road shut. The Harkers were willing to leave early, but had medication deliveries scheduled. The woodshop family needed another week to move equipment. Peter wanted Lillian down the mountain before the weather changed. Lillian wanted people to stop discussing her as if she were not in the room. Evan stood beside the wall map and began organizing the problem automatically. People above the lower cut need to identify transport, fuel, medical requirements, and alternate shelter. We should assign, Roy interrupted. Assign? Evan stopped. Roy leaned back in his chair. Son, I don't know what you did before you came up here, but we're not your people. The room went quiet. Evan felt the old response arrive first. Tighten the structure, explain the risk, make the plan clearer. He looked at Gail. She did not rescue him. Good. Evan stepped away from the map. You're right. Roy seemed almost disappointed. Evan continued. Tell me what I'm missing. That changed the room. Not completely. Enough. June explained the horses. Peter described the radio gaps. Gail separated what county could decide from what residents could prepare themselves. Lillian listed which older households could walk a quarter mile and which could not. By the time the meeting ended, they had no perfect plan. They had something more useful. A list built by the people who would have to live with it. Outside, Boone waited beside Lillian while she stepped carefully down the icy hall stairs. Evan whistled once. Boone looked at him, then stayed beside her. Evan shook his head. Looks like I've been replaced. Lillian rested a gloved hand briefly against Boone's shoulder. Maybe he doesn't think everything good has to belong to one person. Evan opened the truck door for her without answering. Back at the cabin, Peter checked the weather radio. The forecast had changed. A warmer Pacific system was moving inland. Temperatures were expected to rise above freezing during the day, with steady rain falling across existing snowpack. Gail heard the bulletin over the handheld. Her expression tightened. Rain on frozen ground was worse than another clean snow. It meant fast runoff. Peter looked toward the dark ridge. Lillian folded Warren's maps and placed them carefully back in the metal box. Then she looked at her son. I'm not leaving because you order me to. Peter closed his eyes. Before he could answer, she added, If we prepare, I'll do my part. He looked at her. Lillian fastened the box. I didn't say I had to do all of it. By sunrise, the volunteer hall had been replaced by a kitchen wall covered in names. Peter taped a county road map beside Lillian's pantry. Gail added a sheet for radio checks. Raymond Pike sent up 2 warning signs with a county truck and marked the softest section of Red Willow Road with orange stakes. Nobody pretended they were fixing the road. They were buying time and making sure every person above the lower cut knew what to do if the weather turned faster than expected. The warm rain was due by evening. Lillian's cabin became the logical contact point because it sat above the unstable section, but below most of the higher homes. The wood stove worked without electricity. The spring cistern still held enough water. There were blankets, 2 radios, lanterns, a pantry that Lillian considered adequate and Peter considered criminally understocked, and enough floor space for several people if the road closed. By 8, the yard was busy. June Bell arrived with 2 horse trailers and a neighbor willing to take her animals lower in the valley. The Harkers left before the temperature rose. Peter checked batteries and wrote call signs on tape. Gail walked the private overflow branch with Raymond over radio, while 2 volunteers opened a shallow relief channel through soft ground, well away from the county road. Evan was everywhere. He carried stakes to Gail, then checked the knots after someone else set them. He moved firewood, rewrote Peter's radio order, inspected the generator even though Peter had already tested it, then volunteered to walk the upper service cut alone. By 10, Lillian had noticed. By noon, everyone else had. Stop moving that box, Peter said. Evan looked down at the crate of batteries in his hands. It's in the wrong place. You put it there 20 minutes ago. I changed my mind. Peter pointed toward the table. That is the third time. Evan moved the crate anyway. Boone watched from beneath the porch roof. The German Shepherd had spent the morning following activity without getting underfoot. When Gale walked toward the old overflow, Boone went halfway and returned. When Lillian carried blankets from the bedroom, he paced beside her to the storage bench. He had no assignment. He simply remained aware of the people who mattered to him. Gale came through the kitchen door carrying mud on her boots and irritation in her face. Raymond says the relief channel can stay where it is. No deeper. I want to check the upper branch before dark, Evan said. I already have someone doing that. Who? Roy's nephew drove past it this morning. That's not a check. Gale set her clipboard down. It is enough for today. We need eyes on the cut. We need people here when the rain starts. I can be back in 40 minutes. Gale gave him a flat look. You hear yourself. Evan's shoulders tightened. Lillian, standing at the sink, dried her hands. You're doing it again. He turned. Doing what? Making yourself the only person allowed to carry the part that scares you. That is not what I'm doing. It is exactly what you're doing. Evan looked toward the map. I'm making sure the plan holds. Lillian walked closer. No. You are giving everybody else the pieces you can tolerate letting go of, then keeping the responsibility for all of it. That's not fair. Gale folded her arms. She's right. The words landed harder because Gale had no emotional investment in proving anything to him. Evan looked from one woman to the other. Outside, a county truck rolled slowly down the road. Raymond Pike stopped long enough to plant another warning marker near the entrance, then continued toward the lower cut. Work went on around Evan. Nobody waited for him. Peter checked radios. June left with the horses. Lillian stacked blankets. Gale updated the call sheet. For several minutes, Evan stood in the center of a system that was functioning without his hands on every part of it. He hated how exposed that made him feel. By late afternoon, the temperature had risen enough for water to drip steadily from the porch roof. Snow along the yard edges had darkened and settled. The forecast had moved the first rain forward by an hour. Evan went to the mudroom and pulled on his olive field jacket. Gale saw him. Where? Upper service cut. No. I'm not asking you to come. That is not what I meant. Evan picked up his flashlight and radio. 40 minutes. Lillian appeared behind Gale. You heard her? I heard her. Then why are you still putting on gloves? Evan did not answer. He stepped onto the porch. Boone. The shepherd lifted his head from beside Lillian's chair. Evan tapped his leg once. Come. Boone stood. For a second, Evan thought the argument was finished. Then Boone walked past him. The dog stopped beside Lillian, not behind her. Beside her. Evan turned. Boone. The shepherd looked at him. Evan's voice changed almost without his knowing it. Tighter. Lower. Here. Boone remained where he was. No growl, no lowered ears, no fear. He simply did not move. Lillian watched the dog first, then Evan. He's seen you like this before. Evan looked away. Boone has seen me in a lot of situations. That wasn't my question. Peter came in from the side yard carrying a coil of extension cable. He stopped when he saw the room. Evan's hand closed around the radio. For years, he had been able to describe what happened to Caleb Hart in clean sentences. The mission changed. The exit narrowed. Caleb took over. Caleb got hurt. Everyone lived. Those facts were accurate and useless. What Evan had never said aloud was what came afterward. I knew I was slipping, he said. Nobody moved. Not physically. Judgment. Timing. Too many things at once. and I knew I wasn't sorting them cleanly anymore. His eyes stayed on Boone. I kept making the calls anyway. Peter set the cable down. Why? Because I was responsible. Gale said nothing. Evan continued. Caleb saw it before I admitted it. He took over the withdrawal, got everyone moving the right direction. His jaw tightened. He paid for it. Peter asked quietly, "He died?" "No." The answer came sharp, then softer. "No. He lived. His career didn't." Lillian understood before Evan finished. "You decided. That made it yours." Evan nodded once. "Caleb told me it was his choice. Said I needed to stop turning his decision into my guilt. And you didn't." "No." Rain ticked once against the window. Then again. Evan looked at the map on the wall. "I thought if I carried the worst part myself, nobody else would ever have to pay for me again." Peter stepped closer. "But if you make every decision yourself, everyone else still pays when you're wrong." Evan looked at him. Peter's voice stayed calm. "They just don't get to choose what part they're willing to carry." Nobody spoke after that. The first drops of rain tapped the porch roof in an uneven rhythm. Evan removed one glove, then the other. He went to the task board. His name appeared beside uppercut inspection, relief channel support, generator backup, and road marker check. He erased 3 of them, turned to Gale. "Where do you want me?" Gale studied him for a second. "Here. Radio support until Raymond closes the lower section. Then you help Peter with the walking route markers." Evan nodded. Boone stood. The shepherd crossed the room and stopped at Evan's left side. Evan rested 2 fingers briefly against his neck. No apology, no command. They understood enough. Later, Peter found Lillian alone near the pantry sorting spare radio batteries. "You know I don't want this place," he said. She kept working. "I never said you did. You act like every time I ask you to leave for a storm, I'm trying to win something." Lillian stopped. Peter looked toward the rain beginning to darken the yard. "I don't want the cabin. I don't want the land. I don't want to win against you." His voice roughened. "I just want one winter where the phone rings, and I don't think somebody is calling to tell me I waited too long." Lillian looked down at the battery in her hand. For once, no answer came quickly. She crossed the room, opened a drawer beneath Warren's old radio shelf, and took out a smaller handheld unit. She gave it to Peter. "Morning and evening check-in when weather turns." He looked at the radio. "You actually mean that?" "Yes." "And the spare key?" Lillian sighed. "Do not become greedy." Peter almost smiled. She took the key from her ring anyway. "If I miss a check because the radio drops for 5 minutes, you do not drive up here like a man being chased." 10 minutes. 20. 15. Lillian handed him the key. "Your father would be ashamed of your bargaining. He taught me." By dark, every household above the lower cut had a call sign. The Harkers had checked in from town. June's horses were safely below the ridge. Raymond reported that the road still open, but under watch. Rain fell steadily now, soaking into old snow. At 7, Gale began the evening radio check. One household answered, then another, then a third. Peter marked each name. "Roy Alden?" Gale called. Static. She tried again. "Roy, this is Red Willow Base. Check in." Nothing. Lillian looked at the clock. Roy had gone to town that afternoon with his grandson, Ben. They should have been back before 6. Gale changed frequency and called again. This time the radio cracked. A young voice broke through, thin and distant. "Red Willow. This is Ben." Peter grabbed a pencil. "Ben, go ahead." Static swallowed half the reply. Then the 16-year-old's voice returned. "Truck can't get through. Grandpa said I..." The signal disappeared. Outside, the rain struck the old snow harder. The rain did not stop after Ben's transmission disappeared. It settled in instead, steady and cold, drumming on the cabin roof and running in dark lines down the windows. Outside, old snow collapsed under the warmer water, turning the yard gray at the edges. Gale tried Ben again. "Ben Alden, this is Red Willow Base. Come back." Static answered. Peter stood over the map with a pencil in one hand, and the spare radio Lillian had given him clipped to his belt. Raymond Pike's voice came over the county channel before anyone could try again. "Lower cut is closed. Repeat, Red Willow Road is closed at marker 17. Gale lifted the handset. "What changed?" "Surface dropped about 4 inches on the west lane. Crack opened along the shoulder. Water's crossing where it shouldn't. Nobody drives over it. Roy and Ben are above you." "I know." The room tightened. Raymond continued. "Truck can't safely cross. I've got cones and a county vehicle holding the lower side. If you search from above, stay off the road edge." Gale looked at Evan. Not because he was a Navy SEAL. Because Boone was already standing. "We keep it small," Gale said. "Me, Evan, Boone. Peter stays here with Lillian and keeps the households talking." Peter opened his mouth. Lillian pointed at the radio board. "You wanted a system? Use it." That settled him. Evan pulled on his olive field jacket and checked Boone's harness. He did not add instructions nobody had asked for. Gale noticed. She said nothing. They left by a private walking route that ran parallel to Red Willow Road through higher ground. Rain had softened the snow into heavy slush. Boone moved ahead on lead, conserving energy, ears working constantly. At the first view of the road, Evan saw why Raymond had closed it. Nothing looked dramatic. That made it worse. A section of pavement had simply settled lower than the rest. A narrow crack curved through the shoulder, and brown water moved across gravel where dry ground should have been. The road still looked usable to someone who wanted badly enough to believe it was. Gale stopped Evan before he stepped closer. "County line." He nodded and stayed back. They continued uphill. Roy's pickup appeared 20 minutes later, beside a fallen pine. The tree had come down across part of the lane, but the truck itself sat straight. No broken glass. No major impact. Driver's door unlocked. No Roy. No Ben. Evan scanned the inside. A thermos lay in the cup holder. Ben's phone charger was still plugged in. A folded wool cap rested on the passenger seat. Gale picked it up with 2 fingers. "Roy wears this?" "Every cold day," Lillian answered over radio after Peter relayed the question. The hat had been used recently and stayed dry inside the truck. Good enough. Evan crouched beside Boone and let the shepherd take the scent without rushing him. Boone sniffed the cap, turned away, then returned for another breath. After that, his body changed. Not excitement. Focus. Gale handed the hat back to Evan. "Let him work." Boone moved around the truck first, checking where scent collected around the doors and roadside. Then he chose a line leading away from the pavement toward the timber. The route split after 50 yards. The left branch was shorter and climbed toward the ridge trail. The right descended through cedar and brush. Evan looked left. "That connects faster to the upper road." Boone leaned toward the right. Evan felt the old impulse arrive. Assess, decide, move. He stopped himself. "Gale," she looked over. "Decision's yours." For half a second, Gale said nothing. Then she studied the ground, the slope and Boone's body position. Beneath the rain, a few shallow impressions crossed toward the cedars. Right. They followed Boone. No speech, no congratulations, just a choice handed over and accepted. At the cabin, Lillian heard the update and pulled Warren's old map closer under the lamp. Peter kept calling the remaining households, while she traced the lower contour lines with one finger. Roy had lived on Red Willow Ridge for more than 30 years. If he had left the road on foot, he would not have wandered without purpose. Her finger stopped. A small square near the cedar cut. Road shed. She grabbed the radio. "Gail, go ahead." There used to be a county road shed below Cedar Cut. Warren marked it on the old map, maybe a quarter-mile east of where you are. Still standing? I haven't seen it in years. Would Roy know it? Lillian looked at Peter. Peter nodded. Everybody who worked the old road knew it. Lillian keyed the radio again. If it's still there, Roy would know. Gail changed course slightly, using Boone's scent line and the map together. That mattered. The dog gave them direction. The people gave that direction meaning. They found the shed 12 minutes later. It leaned to one side beneath cedar branches, small and ugly and very much standing. Ben opened the door before they reached it. He was 16, tall and narrow in a charcoal puffer jacket. Wet hair stuck to his forehead. Relief flashed across his face, but he stayed composed. "Grandpa's inside." Roy Alden sat on an old crate wrapped in a canvas tarp from the pickup. He looked tired, irritated, and completely capable of complaining. "Took you long enough?" Gail smiled. "That means he's fine." Ben explained what happened while Evan checked Roy's general condition. They had reached the fallen pine and stopped. Roy got out to look at the road ahead. Ben noticed water cutting across the shoulder farther down and told his grandfather the pavement looked wrong. Then part of the edge shifted. Not collapsed. Moved. That was enough. Ben convinced Roy not to try driving around the tree. They took the thermos, radio, and a small emergency bag, then walked to the old road. Shed Roy remembered from years earlier. Ben had kept the radio inside his jacket. He had made Roy sip water. He had kept him moving every few minutes, instead of letting him sit completely still. Roy looked at his grandson. He has become unbearable since learning preparedness. Ben shrugged. "You're welcome." Evan almost laughed. They waited long enough for Roy to warm and steady, then started back by the same protected route. Gail led. Boone worked closer to the group now, no longer searching. Rain had begun to weaken. The ground had not. Near the old culvert line, a deep metallic sound traveled through the slope. Not loud. Low. A long vibration followed, like heavy steel shifting somewhere underground. Evan stopped. His body stopped before thought did. Rain on his hood disappeared. The cedars changed shape. For a moment, he was nowhere near Red Willow Ridge. Boone turned instantly. The shepherd pressed his shoulder hard against Evan's left leg. Evan looked down. Boone stayed. Warm body. Wet fur. Present ground. Evan could hear Gail saying his name, but he did not answer immediately. The old instinct told him to hide it. "Move. Keep everyone else moving. Do not become the delay." He reached for the radio. "Gail." She was 10 feet ahead. "I'm here." Evan swallowed. "I need 10 seconds." No apology followed. Gail looked at Roy, Ben, the slope, then back at Evan. "You have 10. The radio cracked. Lillian's voice came through from the cabin. "Stay left of the cedar marker. Do not take the gully." Warren marked that ground soft, even before the fire. Evan closed his eyes once. One breath. 2. Boone's shoulder remained against him. When Evan opened his eyes, the cedars were cedars again. Rain. Mud. Gail. Roy. Ben. Boone. "Ready." Gail nodded. "Move." They did. The return took longer because Roy tired quickly, and nobody pretended otherwise. Evan carried part of the emergency bag. Gail adjusted the pace. Ben stayed beside his grandfather. Boone moved between the front and rear of the group, checking everyone without being called. When Lillian's cabin finally appeared through the rain, Peter came out onto the porch. Roy lifted one hand. "Tell your mother I expect coffee," Lillian called from behind Peter. "You'll get what you're given." Roy smiled. That was when everyone knew the worst part was over. By midnight, all households had checked in. June's horses were already below the ridge. The Harkers remained in town. The woodshop family had secured their place and stayed off the road. Raymond reported no additional major movement after the closure. The shallow relief channel on private land had reduced some flow into the old overflow branch, but nobody claimed it had saved anything by itself. The rain weakened after midnight. Red Willow Road remained closed. It would stay closed until county engineers could inspect the culvert and damaged base. Lillian set Warren's notebook on the kitchen table. Evan sat across from her, tired but steady. Boone lay between his chair and hers. His eyes went to the torn edge near the back. "You never answered me about that page." Peter, standing near the stove, looked at his mother. Lillian kept one hand on the notebook. For several seconds, rain ticked softly against the glass. Then she said, "I know where it is." Peter's face changed. "Sutoijian nai?" Lillian looked at him. The whole time. By morning, the rain had stopped. Water still moved through the ditch below the cabin, and Red Willow Road remained closed. But the ridge had gone quiet in the way places do after a long night of listening for bad news. Roy and Ben had slept in the front room. Gail left before sunrise to meet Raymond Pike at the lower closure. Peter was already at the kitchen table checking the first radio calls of the day. Lillian waited until everyone had eaten before she brought Warren's old toolbox from the shed. It was not the green waterproof box that held the maps. This one was smaller, dented along one corner, with a wooden handle polished smooth by decades of use. Peter looked at it. "I thought that was empty." "It nearly is." Lillian set it on the table and removed a brace, 2 old drill bits, a carpenter's pencil, and a rusted hinge Warren had apparently believed deserved another chance. At the bottom was a thin wooden liner. She slipped a butter knife beneath one edge and lifted it. The missing page lay underneath, folded twice. Peter said nothing. Evan sat across from Lillian with Boone at his feet. He watched her unfold the paper carefully. The tear along one side matched the notebook exactly. "You tore it out," Peter said. "Yes." "When?" "After your father died." Lillian did not defend herself. That made the admission heavier. The page was not a secret deed, a hidden account, or a technical solution they had somehow missed. Warren had written a list. Winter relay. Ward cabin. Below it were plain items: radio batteries, fuel reserve water storage, road maps, blankets, porch, light medical kit shelter space. At the bottom, Warren had added a short note in pencil. Lillian read it once without speaking. Then she handed the page to Peter. He read the final line aloud. "If I don't finish this, don't let the place become a box that keeps one person living alone." Peter lowered the page. Lillian looked toward Warren's empty chair near the stove. "For most of our marriage, someone needed something." A fence fixed, a ditch cleared, a stranded driver warmed up, a horse trailer pulled from mud, a family waiting out a storm. Your father could hear a knock on the door from half a mile away if there was work attached to it. Peter smiled faintly. That sounds like him. It was exhausting. The smile disappeared from Lillian's face. When he got older, I wanted a few years that belonged to us, not the road, not the neighbors, not every fool who drove uphill after ignoring a forecast. Evan listened without interrupting. I told him I didn't want the cabin saving anybody anymore. I wanted it to be our home. "What did Dad say?" Peter asked. "Nothing." Lillian looked at the page. That was worse. Warren had put the plan away. Then he died before finishing it. Months later, Lillian had found the notebook and read the last line. She tore the page out because it felt like an accusation from a man who was no longer there to explain himself. After that, she stayed. Year after year. Not only because she loved the cabin. Not only because it was Warren's. Part of her had been proving something to a dead man. That she could live there alone. That wanting the house to belong to her had not been selfish. That she had not asked for the wrong thing too late. Peter rubbed his thumb over the torn edge of the paper. "I never knew." "You weren't supposed to." That worked out well. Lillian gave him a tired look. He did not push. Instead, Peter took the spare key she had given him the night before and set it on the table between them. "I keep this?" "Yes." "And morning and evening check-ins in bad weather?" "Yes." "You call before the water stops completely." Lillian narrowed her eyes. "Do not become ambitious." Peter almost smiled. "And I don't show up because the radio drops for 5 minutes. 15. 10. 12. Evan looked at Boone. The dog lifted his head. "Strong family tradition," Evan said. Peter laughed. Lillian did too, once, against her will. That was how the argument ended. Not with surrender. With terms. 2 days later, county crews reached the damaged section of Red Willow Road. Raymond brought an engineer and a small excavation crew. They confirmed that water had moved fine material from around part of the old culvert bedding. The road base needed proper repair, the culvert needed replacement, and the drainage path had to be corrected before the next thaw. Nobody on the ridge was thanked for saving the road. They had not. What they had done was keep people off it, reduce flow where they legally could, document what they saw, and give the county Warren's old measurements and maps. That was enough. Sometimes, enough was a good word. Evan stayed through the repairs. At first, there was an obvious reason. His pickup needed recovery. His strength was still returning. The ridge remained inconvenient to leave. Then those reasons disappeared one by one. His truck came back. His balance returned. The road reopened under controlled traffic. Peter offered to drive him into town whenever he wanted. Evan said, "Maybe tomorrow." Tomorrow arrived. He repaired the torn strap on his map case instead. The charcoal gray paracord at the buckle had survived. He replaced the damaged webbing, tested the stitching twice, then carried the case to a small room behind Lillian's barn that had once been used for tack and winter storage. He had cleaned it out during the weeks after the storm. A narrow bed, a shelf, a lamp, nothing permanent. Boone stood in the doorway while Evan set the map case beneath the bed. The dog watched him. "Don't make it a thing." Boone lay down. Evan looked at him. "Exactly." Later that afternoon, Lillian found him replacing a cracked board beside the barn door. "You missed your ride." "I noticed." Peter waited 10 minutes. "He mentioned that." Lillian folded her arms. Evan drove the final nail and stood. "Boone and I are staying until winter is finished with this place." Lillian glanced toward the ridge where dirty snow still lined the trees. "Winter at Red Willow does not keep a calendar." "I'm starting to suspect you rely on that." Finally learning something. No one said forever. Winter moved on. The radio check system stayed. Roy complained about it twice a week and answered every call. Ben learned enough about repeater maintenance that Gail began asking him for help. June brought her horses back after the road reopened. Peter visited less often than before, but when he came, he arrived with a task instead of an argument. Lillian changed, too, though she denied it whenever possible. When the pump made a new sound, she called Peter before it stopped. when a porch rail loosened. She told Evan instead of waiting until he noticed. The first time she asked Roy to pick up medicine from town, she complained for 3 days afterward. She still asked. Gail invited Evan to help with a winter search training session. He agreed. Halfway through the exercise, a young volunteer named Marcus started organizing the next search sector. Evan saw 3 things he would have changed immediately. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Gail noticed. Painful? Extremely. Marcus finished the plan. It was not Evan's plan. It worked. Boone, lying beside a marker cone, watched Evan with his amber eyes half closed. "You're enjoying this," Evan told him. Boone sneezed. By early spring, the old dog slept more deeply in the afternoons. Gray had spread farther along his muzzle, but every morning he followed the same routine. Out into the yard with Evan. Back to Lillian's chair while she drank coffee. To the gate when Peter's SUV appeared. Near the radio whenever weather moved across the ridge. Evan stopped calling him back simply because Boone had chosen someone else's side of the room. One April morning, the last clean snow had retreated into the shaded places beneath the pines. Evan stood on a ladder replacing the porch light, housing Warren had installed years earlier. Lillian came outside carrying 2 mugs. Boone settled on the wooden step between them. Below the cabin, a neighbor's truck moved along Red Willow Road. Slowly, ordinarily. It passed the repaired culvert and continued toward the valley. Nobody was stranded. Nobody called for help. No radio cracked to life. Lillian handed Evan a mug when he climbed down. The cabin still needed work. The road would need work again someday. Lillian was still 80. Evan still had moments when old sounds reached farther into him than he wanted. Boone was still getting older. None of that had been repaired by one storm. Evan looked at the dog resting between them. For years, he had believed responsibility meant making sure nobody ever had to carry his weight. Red Willow Ridge had taught him something less clean and more useful. People were allowed to carry what they chose. So was he. Boone opened one eye, checked that both humans were still there, and went back to sleep. Sometimes strength is not carrying everything alone. Sometimes it is knowing when to trust another person, accept a helping hand, or simply admit, I need a moment. Evan, Lillian, and Boone each discovered that independence does not have to mean isolation. The people who care about us are not always trying to take away our choices. Sometimes they are simply asking for the chance to carry part of the road with us. That is worth remembering in ordinary life. We may not face a storm on a mountain, but all of us eventually meet a season that becomes too heavy to manage alone. Letting someone stand beside us can be an act of courage, not weakness. If this story meant something to you, please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. May the road ahead bring you good people, faithful companions, and the wisdom to recognize when you don't have to walk it alone. If you have any feelings, thoughts, or suggestions about this story, would you share them in the comments below so we can listen, learn, and continue making these stories better?